Welcome into a new feature on the Crimson Tide Sports Network called The Other Booth, as we'll get an in-depth preview of Alabama's opponent coming up on Saturday, and this week it's the Texas A&M Aggies. Logan, everybody, this is Roger Hoover. Glad to welcome you back to the Crimson Tide Sports Network, and The Other Booth is brought to you by Alabama One Credit Union. They've been voted Tuscaloosa's best credit union and best mortgage lender. Alabama One, a proud supporter of the Crimson Tide. So with The Other Booth, we're just going to head down the hall like we will on a Saturday when we say hello to the voice of the Texas A&M Aggies. He is Andrew Monaco, joins us live from College Station. And Andrew, it's great to see you. How are the Aggies doing as they get ready for their first road trip of the year coming here to T-Town?
Doing well, thank you. Howdy from Bryan College Station. Good to be with you again, my friend. 1-0 is so much better than 0-1. I know there's the saying in sports, it's not how, it's how many. Yet if you know Coach Jimbo Fisher, you know the how also matters as well. But they get the win over Vanderbilt. I think more than anything, I think this collectively was a group that was very glad to be back on the field, tackling an opponent, but not since the Texas Bowl for Texas A&M. They were very glad to be back in Kyle Field, and now the challenge rises that much more, taking on the Crimson Tide.
And what can you tell us about the offseason for Texas A&M? And they were a trendy pick of a lot of the preseason magazines to be one of these teams that takes a giant leap forward. And some people even thought maybe like LSU took a step forward last year if they can get a win against the likes of Alabama and LSU and Auburn. But just how did things change once the pandemic hit and even the last few weeks leading up to the new schedule that the Aggies have?
The schedule changed. So here's why everybody was looking at 2020. You swap out Clemson for Colorado. Not an easy test, but it's not the one or two team in the country. And then you swap out Georgia as an SEC opponent for Vanderbilt. And so what changes is now it's 10 games in the SEC. And Roger, as you know, it doesn't matter who you're playing. 10 SEC folks, you've got to be on week in and week out. What changed closer to the schedule was a couple of opt-outs for Texas A&M. You're always going to have the injuries. They lost a slot receiver in Cam Buckley, a senior, that kind of leadership and experience. They lost two tight ends, Baylor Cupp, his second season that he has been injured, this time a shoulder, and Blake Smith, who came in, one of the recruits. So still have Jalen Weidemeyer, but a position of strength is now thinner than it was before. And then you have Jamon Osmond, who opts out, the leading wide receiver, and a roommate of Kellen Mond, the Aggies quarterback. And Anthony Hines was a late opt-out as well, one of the starting linebackers alongside Buddy Johnson. So you have that kind of adjustment. So the schedule adjusts, but everybody knows it's 10 SEC games. All the opponents, all the teams, all the schools in the SEC know that. Now it's a matter of getting ready. And Jimbo Fisher talked about it last week on his coach's show. You had to compress a spring ball and fall ball together. Reason why I say that, the Aggies had a lot of early enrollees. 13 or 14, they got their schooling done. They got their first semester, and they got terminology down. The hard part was not being out on that football field for those 15 or 20 days and then that spring scrimmage. That was compressed. And I think in the spring you wanted to see what kind of leadership coming from their teammates, a Buddy Johnson at linebacker. Well, that was just moved to the fall. That's all. But you like to have that. It just got compressed a little bit. But Jimbo Fisher really liked the camps that they had. He liked the game week prep. He liked the scrimmages, so that was a good thing. And he's really excited about the 3 recruiting classes now that he's brought into Texas A&M.
And of course, Alabama fans were focused on Alabama and Missouri during most of Texas A&M's game against the Vanderbilt Commodores. Just what can you tell us for fans that didn't get a chance to watch? What can you really tell us about how A&M performed and maybe go beyond the score? Because I think a lot of people were surprised that it was a closer game.
Absolutely, and absolutely Aggie fans thought that as well. Jimbo Fisher said this afterwards, could never find a rhythm. They would have a really good drive. Look, turnovers will kill you. They put the ball on the ground 3 times. You can't fumble it away 3 times. Jimbo's really big on number of plays when he talks about tempo. The total number of plays that you have in a game, Aggies only had 55. They only had 8 possessions in the game. So this is a team that prefers 70 to 75 on the low end when it comes to plays, 12 possessions in an entire game. And you know they are very good at time of possession, and they were 7 minutes fewer than Vanderbilt. So they had some really good drives, and then some more good drives that either a penalty, they had a completion down to the 1, but a penalty takes them back to the 25, and on the next play, it's a fumble. Same thing. Another good drive, chance to score, they put it on the ground. Turnovers and big plays is what Jimbo Fisher talks about. The turnovers kept Vanderbilt in the game. Aggies on the other side had 2 interceptions. The defense made plays when they absolutely had to. And I think that's one of the strengths of Texas A&M moving forward. So they made the plays when they have to. I think the disconnect was they had practiced, scrimmaged so well, that execution, we didn't see that on Saturday. Now the urgency rises when you take on an Alabama Crimson Tide team.
Certainly does, and with that, one of the biggest positions on the football field is quarterback, and it's a familiar name to a lot of Alabama fans in Kellen Mond because we've seen him have some really good moments at times in the games between Alabama and Texas A&M over the last few years. We've also seen him have a tough go of it at times. Just where is he in terms of his consistency heading into this Saturday?
This is his 3rd year now under Jimbo Fisher, and his 4th year as a starter. People forget he started as a freshman, now kind of thrown into the fire, and the game is definitely different for him now in his 4th year at A&M, but the 3rd under Jimbo. The best way for me to explain this to you is I asked Jimbo last week, who's harder on Kellen Mond, you or himself? And he said Kellen, at this part of his career, is probably harder on himself than I am. Not saying Jimbo's easy. He's the quarterback whisperer who doesn't whisper anything. That's the way he is. But I think the understanding to start with Kellen and Jimbo in their 1st year, it's learning a new language together. Now they can speak that language, and now Kellen is seeing things very quickly on the field. I asked Kellen one time, what do you look for as soon as you turn out of that huddle and come to the line? And he explained all that goes through his mind and his calls. But he says with Jimbo, it becomes even more complicated. You could have 2 or 3 plays come in, but now he's identifying that so much more quickly. I think it's a confidence thing. He actually admitted during camp that there was a fear of failure in the past. He's getting over that and getting that confidence. And Jimbo Fisher says it's almost like a point guard in basketball who's seeing what the head coach says. At a certain point, the head coach can back off. Jimbo's still going to send in the play, but he doesn't. The understanding that when the point guard can see that defense and call the play the moment the head coach is sending it in, I think that's what's happening now. It's a different level of communication, a different level of trust between the two. And he's the most confident guy. Leadership is another change. Kellen is now more vocal as a leader. And as Jimbo says, this team, both the offense and the defense, will play for number 11.
And he's got some help around him, even with Jamon Osmond opting out for the season. He still has some really talented wide receivers, and I know the running game is also a big strength of the Aggies. Isaiah Spiller had over 100 yards last time out.
Yeah, he did on just 8 carries, a 57-yard rush to start the second half. Isaiah comes back for his 2nd season. Now, Anias Smith, who's back there, is also a sophomore, but this will be his 3rd game in the backfield. They necessitated that move before the Texas Bowl last year. And the reason why Anias is there is he has an absolute grasp of this playbook, and that's why there's that comfort. One change you will probably see, and we saw it in the second half against Vanderbilt, is the 2-back offense. And if that sounds familiar to college football fans, remember Jimbo Fisher ran a lot of 2-back at Florida State. Now he does have that kind of depth. I think he wanted to do this last year with Ja'Shawn Corbin and Isaiah Spiller and maybe ease Isaiah in. But when Ja'Shawn got injured against Clemson, it was baptism by fire by Isaiah Spiller. And I talked to him earlier this week, and Isaiah said, you know what, he doesn't have good memories from Alabama because he put the ball on the turf in that game. He fumbled. Well, Isaiah, from that game on through the rest of the season, was much more ball secure, was a better blocker, and Jimbo, you'll also see him sometimes split out. He can be a receiver as well. But for a Jimbo Fisher running back, you have to be able to not just carry it and hit the holes, but you have to block, you have to catch. You need complete backs. They really are 2 complete backs. Anias isn't as big as Isaiah, but just as strong. It's exciting seeing both of them in that backfield. Now, again, it's all going to be up to that offensive line to give them the holes or give Kellen that time. But I think it's 2 dynamic running backs now for Jimbo Fisher.
Yeah, and with that offensive line, were they as sharp as you thought they would be against Vanderbilt? They are one of the most experienced lines in the SEC, bringing back 4 out of 5 starters.
Yes and no. Like as a unit, you did not see. I think there was one pre-snap penalty on them, and that's what you're going to expect from a line like that. There should not be pre-snap penalties. But I thought they could dominate a little bit more. Now, that being said, Vanderbilt's strength is their defense, although their offense really surprised me. Ken Seals, as a true freshman, first game at Kyle Field. I know it wasn't 100,000, but still very poised for a kid coming back to Texas. Did very well. And that defense is experienced. But no, you're expecting an awful lot from this offensive line. And they're expecting an awful lot from themselves. It's not like, oh, the outside expectations are going to be larger than what's within that room and on that line. So they know they have to keep Kellen as clean as possible. I don't know if that is possible in the SEC. The front lines are too good. The linebackers in those lines are just too good. But does he have to take unnecessary hits? That, I think, is the key. Reason why I hesitated and waited, there was a 3rd and 1 late in that game where the Aggies got 1/3 of a yard, went for it on 4th and half a yard, and then fumbled that possession. Jimbo Fisher will always challenge this line. Josh Henson, their offensive line coach, will always challenge this line. You have got to get that yard. They didn't do that. Can they correct it this week leading into this game?
Well, going up against Alabama, as we look at the Texas A&M defense, sometimes you have to pick your poison. Alabama's got a high-powered passing attack and also can run the football with Najee Harris. Where do you think A&M could have more success, shutting down the passing game or shutting down the running game for Alabama?
I'm not sure it be shut down, so can you limit the damage? 2 years ago at Bryant-Denny, it was the yards after the catch or the yards after a missed tackle. And that, I think, has been a big change under Mike Elko, the defensive coordinator, is this is a team that I think is more sure-handed when it comes to tackling. So you don't have short yardage gainers becoming big plays and chunk plays, and I think they're momentum changers in games. I don't know if you can absolutely shut down, but limit as much as possible. Najee Harris, you'd love to say, you could do it for 20 consecutive carries. And then there's a confidence and the ability of Harris to just bust it in 21, the 21st carry. And you're thinking, wow, overall we did a good job, but that's a killer. But this A&M defense knows it has to be every play, that there can be no plays off, not just on the defensive end, the special teams as well, which was a backbreaker for A&M last year at Kyle Field. Probably the worst special team effort. As I say that, because of what Alabama does, really magnified the worst special team effort since Jimbo has been here at Texas A&M. But that offense, look, if you can, this is what Michael Clemens told everybody on Tuesday of this week. He said, can we make them uncomfortable? Can we get them out of a rhythm? And that has to be something every snap. You would love to be able to force turnovers, but you can't be a superhero and take yourself out of position. So that means make the sure tackle, strip the ball if you get an opportunity, but just be in position that entire time. Like I said, if you can maybe slow down the number of plays, same way. Get off the field. If the defense can get off the field more times than not on 3rd down, or try to keep Alabama in a 3rd and long. It's not, even when you know what the Crimson Tide are going to do, they have so much talent to still be able to do what they want. But I think it's going to have to be a focus for an entire 60 minutes, because if you even try to exhale or back off a little bit, that's when the Crimson Tide will hit you, and then it can really snowball against you.
Beyond Buddy Johnson, who are some of the other guys that Alabama fans should look out for on that Texas A&M defense?
Well, I think you'll like the ends of Michael Clemens. DeMarvin Leal will be on the outside and also the inside. Clemens is a grad student and has really assumed some leadership. Terrific game, 1.5 sacks. And he followed up a Texas Bowl victory. He played very well. I thought he got better as the season last year and is more vocal as well this year. Really good to see. DeMarvin is a sophomore, very talented D-line. I really like their defensive tackles. And I know I said this to Jimbo last week, and I don't mean it this way, but I could not think of any other way to describe that position for college football fans. It's unsexy. But when a defensive tackle does his job, it makes everybody else better. but we don't really take a look at them. They're a lot like the offensive linemen of the defense, right? The ends get a lot of credit. The linebackers get a ton of credit. But when you have very good defensive tackles, and for Texas A&M, if you think about what Kingsley Keke did on Monday night for Green Bay, that's what he was doing at Texas A&M. If you think about Justin Madubuike and his impact on A&M, that's an important part of the defense. My partner is Dave Elmendorf, a safety. And Dave said, look, I love the back end, but if that defensive line is disruptive, it makes it easier for us on the back end. So on that back end, Damani Richardson, who had the interception last year in the end zone of Tua Tagovailoa, Damani something special. And again, my partner was a safety, not just at A&M, but a decade for the Rams. He sees that he's something special. Playmaker, reads his keys in the right position. They're deeper and more talented, I think, in all positions there on the defensive end. And if you're not deep in the SEC, if you can only go 4 deep on the defensive line, you either have to play them way too many minutes, way too many snaps. But when you can rotate, the Aggies can now rotate some depth and some talent on that defensive side of the ball.
Well, Andrew, as we start to wrap things up, of course, we're excited for the first home game for Alabama coming up this Saturday against Texas A&M, and it's a great home field advantage at Bryant-Denny. It's also a great home field advantage for all of you at Kyle Field. Just what was game day like with reduced capacity inside Kyle Field? We all know about the 12th man, the midnight yell practice, the Aggie war hymn. Just how were all of those traditions, and how did everything feel on Saturday at home?
It was the first midnight yell that was done virtually. So the yell leaders were there. Yeah, on Zoom. So that was different, but you still kept that tradition alive. It was good to see the core. They were able to be in there. It was good to see the students. It was good to see them stand the entire game as the 12th man does. Yes, it was reduced capacity, but I think there was the appreciation of we all get to be back here together. And I'm telling you, they made some noise. Maybe none louder than Leon O'Neal Jr.'s interception to help seal that game. It wasn't a normal Kyle Field. The press box did not sway. But I think we have both been asked by people, how do you keep that energy when it is at 25%? Well, I'm telling you, the 12th man at Kyle Field certainly brought that energy. And as you know, the student athletes themselves and those plays can bring it as well. But early, it was like, who is going to be here? And then when you saw who was in that stadium, it was really gratifying that we did all we had to do to get here. We were careful. We were diligent. We're not going to mess it up at the last moment. And it was kind of an embrace for everybody to say, okay, here we go. Aggie football is back.
Now, was Reveille there? Did Reveille get to watch the game in person?
Miss Rev can watch wherever she pleases. She actually did not lead the team out, which was a shame, but she did have an appearance on game day, a virtual step off, if you will, and the entrance. The magnificence of the First Lady of Aggieland. She was definitely there because she's got to be petted. And what would have been missed, it's interesting because Travion Williams now in Cincinnati, the last thing he did before coming onto that field was pet Miss Rev. Now, I don't know if anyone's going to assume that new role, but unfortunately she was not. They weren't able to be let out, because we're being careful, the social distancing. Maybe towards the end of the year we can do that. Didn't even have the cannon, Roger, which to me is, yeah, I think they would know how to socially distance the cannon. Some of those things are some of the things that you missed, but it was almost like afterwards or after a touchdown, you always wait for that cannon and you're like, oh, it's not there. Maybe we can get it later on in the season, though.
Well, hopefully that will be the case for all of you in College Station. And Andrew, thank you for joining us over these last 20 minutes to really break down the Aggies. We can't wait to have you guys in Tuscaloosa on Saturday. Looking forward to a really fun game. So thank you for joining us.
Pleasure, my friend. Thank you for having me.
All right. Thanks to Andrew Monaco, the voice of the Texas A&M Aggies. This has been Roger Hoover. Thank you for watching the Crimson Tide Sports Network.